everybody. Thank you for being with us today. Really grateful for each of you. We have familiar faces and a smaller space, but we're recording this with the excitement of any fireside that we've ever had. It will be likely our smallest, but I believe one of our most potent. And I asked Sister to mute, because I heard some background noise, but I loved it so much during that intro that now I wonder if we should stay on with the books and the sounds of nature with us at all times. It's really a pleasure to have her with us today as our honored guest for today's session. We will be moving through the fireside with I would say typical exploration, but given the smaller group, hoping for it to be more conversational, more open, and for people to feel willing to engage. And just return to a few slides that we've used to guide KB6, reflecting on questions like what is my most fertile path, what is Kernel's within the space that we sit in, and what is ours collectively. We hope to deepen relationships amongst those in Kernel, explore under-discussed ideas in the syllabus, including the ones from today, and then imagine how we can design more humane and human tools that allow us to build a better web. We've used in the past these ideas to help us, the ideas of mutual aid, lively relationships, infinite games, open fields, remembrance. These words evoke certain feelings. And I think that the word that we will return to today that kind of fits within all of these is conversation. And I hope that you've perhaps gotten to spend a bit of time with that section of the syllabus. Sister, myself, and Andy are excited to use this time to explore it with each of you. So conversation is a word that has a lot to it. And the first part of conversation that I suppose I want to return to first is balance. And as all of you know, we've been playing this game, this infinite game that we hope for. And are striving for a bit of balance ourselves financially. And we're going through this process right now of figuring out how Kernel itself will financially sustain what that story could or should look like. And one of the quotes that we pulled from this section of the syllabus is this idea called the stirring of the ashes. And it's described here below. It says, in this ceremony, the collective gathers to assess the last cycle and prepare for the next. This collective stirring of the ashes is critical to understand the nuances of credit and debit in the native context. Credit might be better termed commons, for we are considering here commons-based societies. And when I was reflecting on the stirring of the ashes, the ceremony there, I reflected that, the person who's most clearly introduced me to ceremonies around cycles and around the ways that we can kind of tap into reflect is Sister Tibebwa, who joined us in Kernel Block 4. I remember distinctly the first call I had with her as one where I recognized quite quickly that while she was very earnest in her explorations of Web3 for what she does on Lamu Island in Kenya, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, without roads, without cars, and is a place that they have been exploring a variety of ideas around grassroots currencies, around experimentation with Web3 that might bring health to the ecosystem, both the people that live there and the environment. So she had lots of questions for me about Web3, but every time she spoke, I had a sense that I was learning more from what she was saying anything that I could have shared. And she's trained in Hermetic wisdom. She's a Hermetic nun. And I would hope, sister, that you could spend a bit of time maybe telling us a bit of that story that I realized we haven't really heard, in terms of how you made your way to Long Island and your story. And then move into dialogue around what the conversation section of the syllabus provides us. And Andy may, before sister, if you don't mind, provide a bit of context on how this section of the syllabus evolved. We had the whole syllabus written, and it was only through conversations in kernel blocks that conversation and heavily inspired by people who brought us into Indigenous conversational spaces, which we're very grateful for. That created what to me is a section of the syllabus that, or a section of the site that is kind of even separate from the syllabus, that has had, you know, just as much meaning to me as the words that we typically explore in these firesides. So Andy, if you don't mind, on conversation, telling a bit about how the section evolved, then we can move to Sister Tibebwa sharing about her background and anything that's caught her attention from our introduction.
Sure. Thank you very much. Sister, it's lovely to see you. And thank you for agreeing to be with us. Susie, Glenn, Hazel, Marsha, and Helen, and Tina, it's lovely to see you too. Thank you for coming for this particular dose of emptiness. The practical answer to this question is that in Genesis block, and indeed beyond, once the syllabus was done to its first approximation, there was a great deal of discussion about many different aspects of it, which was endlessly surprising to me, having built many digital structures like it before and never really having had much interaction around it. To have all of this read and reflected on by a group of amazing people each week was a unique experience for myself, and it led to many incredible dialogues which mirror exactly what Vivek has just said, that people would reach out to ask questions and I would end up learning much more over the course of our discussions than I felt I was able to give back. And feeling thus, after a particularly long thread, in fact still probably the longest thread in the kernel stack, felt the need to create a new section of the site specifically focused on the conversations that were emerging and were based on or somehow linked to or interwoven with the syllabus itself, but which highlighted or made clear or illuminated certain things that I had previously been completely unaware of. Certain ways of speaking, certain ways of listening, certain traditions, certain protocols. And it was really that word, more than anything else, which prompted the further exploration of this as its own section. That I had come into Kernel's genesis with a very narrow understanding of what protocol is based on my own upbringing and background and based on my technical understanding of the word. It had something to do with code, something to do with technology. And protocol itself, I think, is something far older, far more humane, and far more baked into how we are and who we are and the ways in which we relate to both of those things, as well as the world around us. And this section then grew into an exploration of what protocol means, what the protocols are for speaking, for listening, the sequence of things, not a hierarchy, but a sequence. In the same way that you'll find in the dance guild, dance is choreography, choreography is movement, movement is knowing what to do next. Protocols are about sequence, just as conversation is about sequence, just as breath is about sequence. You can't just go in the whole time. There has to be in and out, give and take, There is a cyclicality and a seasonality to all things at all levels. And that burgeoning or blossoming understanding of protocol has been what this section has been about.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to return now to our wonderful guest, Sister Tibebwa, if you wouldn't mind sharing any thoughts that you'd like about this conversation, about your story, which we would be honored to hear.
Give thanks and praise. So I greet in the name of love and light and peace and darkness. I first wanted to honor and celebrate Kernel for having the courage and the passion and the willingness to firstly open up the void, which is what the open space is, which is, as we've said before, the fallow time, the time of fertility, the time of conception, and the time of degeneration and composting. And so I really, and to bring in any the focus on the mother, I really, as I say, wanted to honor and highlight how courageous you are for doing this, and I wanted to give thanks. I have so many different thoughts and different feelings about the amazing piece that Harold and Andy wrote. It's very thought-provoking. It also made pieces of the puzzle fit together for me. So the learning and the teaching is on both sides, and that's what's so beautiful, and that is the hallmark of the divine feminine, because she would always look for win-win situations, not like transactional ones. And so yeah, I wanted to recognize that the feelings are mutual. And now we have the call to prayer, which we have the divine masculine comes and creates safe and protected spaces, which is what he's doing now. How I came to be here in Lamu Island is, in short, I've lived in Ethiopia as a Rastafarian for over 20 years, and never imagined a time when I would leave Ethiopia. But I had worked in reforestation up in the west of Kenya for about 5 years before 2020. And our company here, which is called Earth Love Limited, we do reforestation and carbon trading in the west of Kenya. So we also do natural herbs, as well as natural cosmetics, as well as alkaline food, which is the electric foods. And so we were promoting our range at the Lamu Yoga Festival in March 2020, as well as teaching a Kemetic form of yoga, which is, there is actually African yoga. It's throughout the walls of the temples of ancient Egypt. It's just that it took some time for yogis to realize that actually when you see who's known as Isis, her real name is Oset, you know, when you see her like that, that's a yoga pose. Or when you see Gug in the plow, that's a yoga pose. And so we were teaching here, and 20th of March came, which was the day that the world started shutting down for COVID. And I had one of my children with me, and he had a cough. And there was no way you could get on an airplane and go back to Ethiopia at that time with a cough. And so we got locked down, Kenya locked down for 7 months. So that was the biggest kind of beloving in my life, because we got shut down in this island. And I began to really realize, you know, what might be happening in our world. As a Bible student, I have studied in depth Revelations and what's called the end of days. And so, yeah, I really realized that that here is a place that we can follow the words of Haile Selassie, which is Rastafari, who speaks always of collective security, which, you know, I won't go into because it's a long historical record of the League of Nations and the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, and him standing for our ability to collectively secure ourselves, or for smaller nations or small individuals to come together to weave a fabric of security. And so that's the birth of collective sovereignty, which is started as a CBO, a community-based organization here, and now through Kernel is also blossoming into a DAO, which is an ability to kind of upload onto Web3 everything that should anyone else in this world be interested in collective sovereignty, how to bring people together and achieve common goals. We endeavor to put everything up there, open source for anyone else to download anywhere, because many people are thinking about doing these things, but the amount of work that needs to be put in to do constitutions and codes of honor and voting systems and governance systems, and, you know, having your own currency, and you know, learning the challenges and the successes. Or just realize that if, you know, if we do it and put it up there and learn from everyone else who's doing it, and then it becomes easier for anyone else who might want to. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I really wanted to talk a little bit about some of the very important things that were brought up by the deep response and by the study of Indigenous cycles and Indigenous matrilineal lineages. I was amazed to see Amenhotep, who, yes, is the father of the whole of the Kemetic lineage, really. Echoing something that, like, you know, technically, if you put the word freedom and shackles in the same context, most people will be that those two things are cancel each other out. Whereas actually, and this is echoing something that I know it's a very strange word to talk about, but the BDSM world, which talks of dominance and submission. And actually, they say the same thing, that there's freedom in the shackles. And there's something about defining your own shackles, or your own mission, or your own purpose, or your own reason for being in the flesh, and focusing on it, knowing that it may be a long journey, it may take you this lifetime or many lifetimes, but through defining it, defining who you are and where you're going, then you have the freedom to be who you really are, rather than trying to be someone else or the definitions that other people give you of yourself. And so on one level, I recognize the wisdom of what Father Hotep is showing us. On another level, there's also the balance. There's the balance of trying to understand things with our intellect and with writing and words and thoughts and what I call the I am, or the ether, the air. And then there's also our inherent wisdom of our bodies, which is, if you want to say, the realm of the earth, the realm of the divine feminine. And so, you know, that piece represented both, because it spoke of Hotep's wisdom, but it also spoke of the corn, the story of cooking the corn, which obviously is about pleasure, and it's about feeling, and it's about the very kind of earthly desire of eating and using our senses, and smelling and tasting and, you know, cooking, and yeah. And so on one side, we've been schooled in the patriarchy. So using our divine masculine energy is easy. That comes without any, it's what we're schooled in. So using our I am, you know, our logic, our discipline, our focus, our work ethic, our rationality, our clarity, those things are kind of easy. It's actually relearning or remembering the gifts of the divine feminine, and learning to honor those gifts equally. That brings the balance of restoring the divine feminine to her rightful place. And so it's in these spaces of the darkness, of the void, of the exhale, of the being rather than doing. It's in those spaces that we can access our pleasure. And when we talk of rituals of rebalancing, it's actually through our pleasure and following our pleasure and following our desires that we can find the balance to the already existing amazing divine masculine gifts that we use every day. I wanted to talk a little bit about who's called Hermes Trismegistus. That's what the Greeks called him, but actually he's an ancient archetype from Kemet, which Kemet is the word that Egypt would have called itself in the ancient times. It wasn't called Egypt at that time. So Kemet is obviously a vessel for indigenous knowledge from the whole of the Nile Basin. So it's like 11 countries, you know, they're countries now, but in those days it wasn't divided up by white people in Germany yet. And so it's a collection of knowledge and wisdom from, you know, nowadays Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, Sudan, Djibouti, and even there's a lot of thought that it may even be from as far down as South Africa. And so when we talk of Hermes Trismegistus and his 7 principles, we're really talking about ancient African knowledge. The 2 that I really wanted to highlight at this point is the principles of polarity and the principles of gender. And so the principles of polarity teach of that we would think that opposites are like linear, and that actually like hot and cold, or love and hate, or, you know, masculine or feminine, that these things are on a line and they're like the opposite poles of a line. But that again is the patriarchal teachings and the indigenous teachings of ancient Africa, where actually that there is duality, but both of those dualities are the exact same in essence. They're just a difference of degrees. So a little bit like a cup of hot tea and a cup of cold tea are still a cup of tea, but it's a difference of degrees. And so what we think of as opposites are actually in essence the same thing. And when you dive deep down into pain, you come into ecstasy. And when you dive deep into ecstasy, you come into pain. And so when we see masculine and feminine and think that somehow they're dual, they're opposites, they're actually the same thing. They're just difference of degrees. And when you look at the law of masculine and feminine, you see that there is masculine and feminine in all things. And so no matter if you're born into one body, a male body, you still have feminine energy running through you. And if you're born into a female body, you still have masculine energy running through you. And that goes with the trees, it goes with the planets, it goes with the water, it goes with the air, it goes with everything. Everything has, because creation starts from this dance of polarity between the two. And so we see it in, for instance, the ancient Indian concepts of Shakti and Shiva, or, a lot of cultures have that it's Father Sky and Mother Earth. Whereas actually in the ancient Kemetic teachings, it's Nut is the sky goddess. And so it's Mother Sky. And it's Geb is Father Earth. And so we see that there's masculine and feminine in all things, including the heavens and the earth. And so that's part of what I love about what we're doing here, because for me, the Web3 space is the aether. It is the heavens, if you want to say. However, we're still took this journey to learn in the school of this earth. And so we're also bringing it back down to the marriage or the sacred union of the ether and the earth. Was there, I wanted to ask, was there any questions about how, because I can carry on reasoning for a really long time. So I think it's a good idea to stop and see if there's any questions on anything so far.
Yeah, I think there are ways we can go, but there's a great question from Anne in the chat that may lead us down fertile paths. And feel free to describe in any way before asking the question.
Yeah, thanks for letting me speak for a sec. So I've been thinking about this a lot, and like a lot of the thinking I've been doing comes from TikTok. I know that seems silly, but I think, listening to people and listening to stories and listening to ideas, doesn't matter what platform it's on, it's just that people are speaking, right? Anyway, so a lot of this comes in, I just want to highlight who it's coming from. A lot of it's coming from Black and Indigenous women, especially queer and trans women. But just this idea of how do we went through this kind of brutal era, 500 years of European colonization, as you highlighted in what you were saying. And I think something that came up on this TikTok that I was like, oh, this is a really good point, is how do we move past that trauma, but not holistically glorify the past? Right, the past of indigeneity, because indigeneity, like someone said in the chat, it's an emergent process, right? It's about connection to land and place, and also connection to self and community. So how do we take the lessons of the past 500 years of global human connection, unfortunately this vehicle of European colonization, but now that we have the internet, now that we have all these different tools, what does it look like to really reimagine indigeneity, and reimagine it not by excluding the past and saying oh, the past is bad or not good, but also not being the past is where everything is, right? Because there were still cultures of homophobia and transphobia in indigeneity, right? Not as widespread as it is now through European colonization, but it was still there. So I think it's important for us to be cognizant of the past being as complicated as the present, right? And as nuanced and as vexing as things are today. So anyway, that's just kind of what I've been thinking a lot about, is how do we imagine what it looks like to be Indigenous for us as individuals today, right? And what does that mean in terms of this Web3 world, in terms of this global world, and especially for me, just as somebody my grandfather's Palestinian, so he fled in that whole thing, and my most of my rest of my family is Black, so I was brought to the Americas through the slave trade, right? So kind of through like, you know, fleeing and slave trade is like my ancestral background. And, you know, how do I become indigenous to this place called, you know, North America or Turtle Island that like, you know, is the place I've called home for my whole life, right? So what does it look like for me to become indigenous to place? And what does that process look like? It's something that's been on my mind a lot. So anyway, that's just some thoughts.
Can I reason?
Please.
Okay. Really important. Well, several questions really, and I'm really again honoring and celebrating your courage and your love for bringing them up, because they're, if you want to say, three elephants in the room that most people, you know, don't have the courage to bring up, especially not in kind of open forums. So again, I wanted to honor and celebrate you for that. I'm going to take the first one first, which is about, if you want to say, how do we heal the family? Like, how do we heal the human family after the last 500 years in particular, but it goes on. Personally speaking, I have been highly sensitized to this as a light-skinned Rastafarian living in Ethiopia for 20 years. You know, having many Rastafarians repatriating to Ethiopia and finding me there. And I'm gonna see if I can, I think it's gonna get dark here. So I was trying to see if I could put some lights on. I tried to look at it on how would it be if we brought it down to individual. So if me and you, Vivek, are best friends or brothers and sisters, and we've been together years and years, and then I do something that absolutely betrays you, and then we, like, you know, we have a big argument or whatever, or you hate me, and we don't see each other for 10 years, and then we meet up somehow by chance 10 years later. If we just continue on and we remember the love and we never talk about, and I never say, oh my God, Vivek, I am so sorry, I did this and that and the next thing to you, and I had no understanding of what I was doing, or I did have understanding of it, but I felt really unable to do it, and I acknowledge what I've done. And if you are at all ready to hear and hold space for my apology and my begging of forgiveness, those are processes that have to be asked for and gone through. And then after, if forgiveness is given, then it is for us, light-skinned people of this world, to also ask, what is it that we can do that would begin to start the healing? And so I think on individual levels, we should be doing this. I think on community levels, we should be doing this. I think on organizational levels, we should be doing this. I think we should be demanding for our banks and our institutions and our insurance companies and our, you know, on every level, we should be doing this. We should be demanding our governments and our principalities should be doing this. I actually did a study to see if there's any kind of apology for the crimes against humanity that the transatlantic enslavement trade was and continues to be. And you can't find it. You can find the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa. You can find the apologies over the Second World War. You can find, but there's not one template, not one anything. The words have not even been put together. And so, like, it's a very, very personal thing for me, and I have I used the Ho'oponopono ritual from, the ancient forgiveness ritual from Hawaii, and I've used that in this respect, and I have written my apology, if you want to say, not just an apology, because it's an acknowledgement is vital, apology is vital, asking for forgiveness is vital, recognizing all of the contributions and values and it's mother and father. Like for me, it's one Black mother and one Black father for the whole human race. We came from East Africa, and so recognizing that and then asking what could we do that might start the process of healing. So that's my personal response on that question. The question of Indigenous, is it stuck in the past? Is it something, it's obviously we're organic beings, and when we come together and form cultures, we're organic. So nothing is static, it's constantly evolving. There is, however, somehow I realize cutoff dates. When we talk about history, it's one thing. When we talk about prehistory, it's another thing. When we talk about archaeology, it's another thing. And so somehow it's always like, for instance, when you talk about homophobia in Indigenous cultures, when in that timeline are we talking about? Because obviously Indigenous cultures were highly influenced by any missionaries coming in or any, prior to the major colonial push, there was still influences, for instance, or, are we going back to the matriarchy? Because obviously the shift, when we shifted from looking at mother God to father God, that was a huge shift in people's consciousness all around in all different societies and cultures about how we looked at gender, sexuality, all those kind of things, right? And judgment and, who's right, who's wrong, that whole thing, property, what the children, are the children, do we need to know our fathers? Do we need to know our mother? All those kind of things were very, very influenced by agriculture and by property, which was unheard of in the matriarchal times, for instance. So how far back do we go? How far forward do we go? And so I go back to the teachings of Haile Selassie because, he's my foundation. And so he spoke of traditions in Ethiopia, which, there's many really important traditions in Ethiopia that, are very important to remember in our world today and to bring back in. One of them being Shmagiles, which is a way of conflict resolution. But now His Majesty taught, just because something has been done over thousands of years doesn't make it necessarily right. And so that's the thing is that, yes, you're right, we romanticize or glorify Indigenous traditions or, in my case, African culture or Yeah, but just because it's been done for centuries doesn't actually necessarily make it right. And so gold must be tried by the fire, which means that everything needs to be questioned. And if it goes through the fire of questioning, then it's true gold. Then it's something that is necessary to remember and bring back into our consciousness. So trial by fire. I'm not sure if that answered everything. Was there something more?
I think that was all beautiful, sister, and please feel free to continue to engage. The one element that I think is worth bringing in that Andy may have the best sense of is Harold, who could not be with us today, but was a big part of Deep Response, which is the specific last part of the conversation syllabus that we asked sister to deeply consider. And I wonder, Andy, if generally speaking, you'd like to say.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sister. Thank you for your willingness and your kindness and your great generosity in accepting these questions and offering the gifts in return. One of the things that has always fascinated me about Hermes Trismegistus, so called by the Greeks, is exactly the principle of polarity, which I think many people might recognize in the syllabus. And one of the wonderful teachings that came out of this dialogue with Harold and the Turo Wampum Working Group and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which they represent, who also so happened to have sky women at the beginning of their creation story. Sky woman falling and grabbing onto a tree of the a sacred branch of the tree of life and pulling it down with her. And that is from whence the medicine plants come, a whole and fascinating story. But one of the really fascinating aspects of polarity, as it is imagined in that post and as it is spoken of by the Turo Wampum group and others in the matrilineal line who protect these protocols for peace, is that balance always has to come from where there is more. And so, as you say, it's not that there are opposites on some kind of linear spectrum at odds with one another, male and female, light and dark, good and bad, right and wrong, but that almost as if one is held within the other. Balance always has to come from where there is more, meaning that, for instance, in the protocol of tribal council, the Turtle Clan, who represents the holders of the great law of peace. Turtles, because they can both protect by knowing the external procedures and rules for consensus, but also because they can pull their heads inside and reflect on the truth in the heart. And the Turtle Clan sits men and women separate. And the women always have to move to the men first. It is always because balance must come from where there is more. It's not to say that women is better than man. It's not to say that one is above the other or anything. It's just that there is a sequence to events, just as there is a sequence to opposites, one held within the other, the essence being exactly the same. And the question that comes to me is, in the beginning, you thanked us for our courage to open the void. And certainly there is a masculine understanding of courage that is prevalent in our culture. But there is something else there about the courage of the feminine, something that is linked to nurture, something that is linked to mystery, something that is linked to conception and courage that I would love for you to explore if you're willing.
Courage. I mean, there's the courage, like the difference they say between bravery and courage is that bravery is when you can do something that you are not really afraid to do. And so a lot of the masculine kind of concept of bravery, the masculine concept of that idea is bravery. And so like oftentimes are the soldiers or the army, they're considered like heroes and brave, right? But they're oftentimes doing things that they've been trained out of not to fear, like they don't fear it. So true courage is when you actually do something that you're afraid to do and you still do it. And so I think it's a more rounder word, if you want to say, and concept. And obviously, if you want to say like the courage of a mother bear protecting her children, or an animal, of a mother's protection, or of standing up against injustice or unjustness. That often, as I say, like it's coming from a place of not necessarily being the strongest one or not necessarily being prepared, but doing it because it comes from within out rather than somehow being trained or being prepared for it. Why I particularly kind of wanted to honor you as in Kernel, is that, like, let's face it, when we opened up this open block, we don't have the hundreds of people coming in that we do when you've got a block that's all about like moving forward and doing adventures and getting somewhere in your career and, you know, getting your projects up and funded. And, you know, like, let's face it, when you talk of opening and doing nothing, if you want to say, we get a couple, maybe 20 people coming, right? And so that's courageous. That's what I say. And the fact that you're able to even speak of following not just the matrilineal lineages, but also indigenous wisdom, those things for most people in this world, they're so outside their radar, like, you know. And so that's why I wanted to honor you. I have seen a little bit of some of the texts that are coming up, although it's a bit difficult for me to talk and see them at the same time. I would love to revisit. I realize with the Ho'oponopono and with what we call the reparations, it's not, I mean, yes, it's important for healing the family, because if it's not acknowledged and if it's not spoken about and if it's not asked for forgiveness and if there is no reparations, it's like a cut that heals on the outside, but underneath it's got an infection. But it's even more important. Maybe some people might think that it's important for dark-skinned people to hear from light-skinned people, blah, blah, blah. But it's actually most important for the perpetrators. It's most important for us because we can't begin to heal and forgive ourselves. And so if you look at what is, because it's not something in the past, it's something that is continuously being repeated, as all the dark-skinned people on this call knows, day by day, in our living. And so the question is, as I say, like, for the healing to begin, it's really important to have these reasonings. And it's really important when dark-skinned people are ready to hold space for not just the apologies, not just the recognitions, but also the reparations. So I just did want to add that because I think I wasn't very clear about that. Yeah.
And please go ahead.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying, sister. I think for me, courage, right? I think a lot about courage, and especially as someone who's like non-binary and like doesn't identify as man or woman. I think courage for me has meant sitting in a painful truth, right? And not like those words being very intentionally picked, like painful truth, right? Like I think it's easy to want to make pleasantries and like, make, niceties and like kind of gloss over like the really jagged reality. And I think like, almost like sitting on a bed of nails type thing. It's like feeling that is important to moving past it, right? Like, and I said in the chat, like in my body, growth, I realized this in like therapy the other week, but I was like, growth and grief feel similar for me. When I'm growing, I'm grieving, or at least it feels that way. And like, I think that it is important to like let like, these like emotions, at least that I have always been as like a Black person deemed as negative. And that's why I was like responsive to what you were saying, Ellen, like anger, right? In my life, historically, anger has been something that is demonized when I am angry, right? As a Black person, when I'm angry, it's like, you cannot be angry. But I realized in my life that my anger is data, right? My anger is telling me something that is important. It is that like bed of nails. It is uncomfortable, but it is true that I should be angry. And now what I do with that data is where I think your point, Ellen, is what's important. Does that anger inform, I don't know, like a beautiful dream of what the future can be and a strategy to get there? Or does it inform me shutting down to the painful truth that is my life? Right? So it's like this really like, you know, it's almost feels like feminine and delicate in its like cruelty. And like, I don't know, like there's like, I'm not really into Buddhism, but like there's just like, you know, like life is pain or something like, I don't know where that's from, but you know, whatever, like, you know, Western imperialism trickled into my brain. But anyway, you know, it's just like, you know, life is pain. I really feel that as I continue to grow and, you know, push myself to learn more, that like the growing that causes the feeling of grief is not something I think's ever going to end for me. And that's just like an interesting thing I'm kind of coming to an acceptance of.
I really love that. I really love that. Sister, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this opportunity, this thread, growth, grief, being intertwined and felt similarly is, I think, there's such a power behind that. So thank you. And sister, we'll make sure to come back to it. I just want to introduce at least one more thing into this fireside that was always my intention. This week, Andy and two others that have made their way onto the call, Abe and Holly, have released a project on prisoners' art. That the project in general is very focused on the ideas of restorative justice, and those two words being really powerful in their own right. They focused very specifically on one story from where to begin their efforts of a woman who was wrongfully imprisoned. And I just think about these words, and that you shared, growth and grief. I think about the ways in which somebody would have to move through that type of situation, especially as you'll see in circumstances of motherhood, in a situation where somebody was wrongfully imprisoned. So this project, I just want to bring up because I think it rhymes a lot with what we've been exploring, and perhaps Holly and Abe may be able to share with us. Sister, if you have any thoughts, we can return to them after watching this short video.
I just wanna breathe again, dive into the deepest end. Oh, I wanna feel something.
I worry that you will not welcome me, will not know that you came from me. March walking, I see you holding mommy's hand. It hurts that your touch is not immediate. When I get your squirmy toddler body in my arms, you're lighter than I imagined. You are still small, my boy.
Let me get back in my body. Oh, I wanna open my hands. I know that healing is for me. I wanna breathe again. Oh, I wanna feel something. I just wanna breathe again. Dive into the deepest end. Oh, I wanna feel something, something good. good, something good. Oh, I wanna feel something, feel something.
Very powerful video. I would really welcome if Abe or Holly would like to share anything about this story. If you feel it relates in any way to the conversation, we really just welcome and thank you for being with us and for doing this work.
Hello. Holly, maybe you want to share something as well. And I apologize. I didn't realize how emotional a moment this might be. Truly remarkable. We've arrived here. And that conversation about courage, is multifaceted, especially in the context of this story. There's been so many dialogues with Sammy that have been truly peeling back of many layers and a great deal of courage on her part to share her story in a way that reveals aspects of her existence, in the skin that she really felt ashamed of and was fearful of exposing. And so I don't think there's any accident that this Genesis project landed with this one person's life. I think our intention all along was just, even if one person's life was impacted, then we accomplished the mission, our purpose, with this particular code. So courage, it's like when we can't have compassion, have courage. And this courage to dialogue and talk about things that we otherwise wouldn't talk to people about. And to have that dialogue. I feel like, as a result of this experience, having that dialogue in places we wouldn't otherwise search, helps us polish the mirror that's our own life. So I feel totally fortunate to have been part of Kernel at the outset of this, just amazing group of humans. And then this incredible team, Holly, Andy, the journeys that we've taken in such a short period of time feels like, truly a revisiting of old friendships all over again. So, but I really, really, really want to just say thank you to Sammy, in front of this group, who I hope you get a chance to meet one day soon, for her courage in sharing the dignity and respect of all life.
Maybe I'll say a couple things too, Abe, then. The one thing that I've noticed, with the several of the previously incarcerated individuals that we've talked to, is that they're almost enlightened, beyond most of us in terms of, being able to get through these situations that they've been placed under, and so, but with their courage, they were able to transcend you know, kind of these situations and become really more, you know, just they have more of an understanding of life, and how, you know, than most anybody else I've met. So I think it's wonderful for me to meet with these people also as part of this project. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much. Thank you. We wish you the very best. The next few days, I know, will be a bit of a whirlwind. We're with you all the way till Tuesday. I want to offer to Sister, if you have any responses going all the way back.
Yes, again, we come back to the same words of courage and the grief in growing, you know, in the emotions, in the power of the emotions, and in somehow trusting that no matter what the outside circumstances look like, that somehow for our soul, it's what we've contracted for our own growth, if you want to say, somehow. Yeah. So the emotions are fertile ground. You're right. Anger, fear, sadness. They're like the primary colors that all other colors are made from. So first chakra, fear, second chakra, sadness, third chakra, anger. They're mixed to make up all the other myriad emotions that we have. But in them, within them, if you want to say is what, okay, this is obviously my worldview, okay? So it's what we come to earth for. The emotions are the gold. The angels and other spiritual beings, the elementals, they don't actually have emotions. They do the will of the universe, Mother, Father, whoever, you know, whatever you want to call it. They do that will without emotion. And so it's the human being. That's why we come in as souls into these bodies for emotions. And so you're right, like, and it is growth through grief or through anger, and it is actually feeling the emotions and working with them, and they're like alarm bells, or they help us focus on something that needs to be focused on. A little bit like when you cut your skin, the pain, you know, makes you focus on the weak part in your skin, and it's like that. And so, like, how we teach it in the tantric world is that, for instance, fear plus oxygen equals exhilaration. So there's many people in this world who pay large amounts of money to jump out of airplanes and do bungee jumping, and, you know, I don't know, all the myriad ways we do of scaring ourselves, roller coasters, but as long as you breathe through it, it brings excitement and exhilaration. And so basically fear comes by the fear of losing something you love, or the fear of, like being stopped from something you love. And so if you focus on the love, actually you get to, as I say, exhilaration. And the same with sadness, like, as long as you emote, because it's emotion. So emotions need motion. The kind of nemesis of emotions is when we freeze, and when we don't actually emote, that's when we put the emotions down into our bodies, and that's when they cause dis-ease. That's when they cause dis-ease. And so the key is to actually move with them. And so with anger, or I would reduce sadness, with sadness, like the tears that need to fall, they're lubrication, and they're lubrication from what was to what actually is. And if we don't allow them to fall, then we get stuck in what was, and we replay again and again and again what was, and it's really hard to move into what is. And again, if you focus on, like, the grief again is usually about, you know, losing something that we've loved, or someone we've loved, or having a situation change. If we focus on the love rather than on the grief, we get to sweet melancholy. And sweet melancholy is, as you know, we all know, it's what the best music is made from, it's what the best art is made from, it's what poetry, it's this incredible inspiration for creativity. And then if you move to anger is like, it's when we perceive that something or someone has blocked us from getting to where we want to get to. So again, we focus on the block and we repeat the anger again and again. But actually, if we shift our focus to where we want to get to, we can use the anger as fuel to help us to get to where we want to go. We might have to take a different route. We might have to somehow change, you know, our destination, but the anger is this incredible fuel. But the key is about focusing on the love of where you want to get to, rather than, you know, what's perceived as being the cause of the anger, the fear, or the grief. There is like, music has this incredible ability to help us emote. And so there is a great practice by a woman called Mama Gina. She wrote a great book called Pussy, a Reclamation. So she works with pleasure as a way to when we in particular as women, but it has the same application for men. When we focus on our pleasure and on our desires, actually, it's the antidote for the work ethic or the work reward ethic. So she teaches of this process called swamping, where you put on a couple of really sad songs and you take, you know, find yourself a space where you can, and you dance to some sad songs, and you dance to some really angry, shitty songs, and then you dance to some fearful songs. And then the key is how to find our way home, because when we go into the underworld, like all the archetypes of all the gods and goddesses that have to go into the underworld and, you know, go through tests, the key is, how do we find our way home? And so we find our way, one of the ways we find our way home is through turn on. And so after, you know, dancing to the sad and the angry and the fearful, if you put on your favorite sexy song or your favorite uplifting song or pleasurable song, and you just dance like no one's watching, that will bring you back home again. And then you've added the pleasure into all of those heavier emotions, if you want to say. And that's the alchemy. There's also working with the earth, because these are all rebalancing rituals, like working with the elements, working with the earth, working with the air, working with the sun and the moon and the stars, working with water, working with the crystals. You know, all those are grounding, all those are rebalancing, all those bring us back to ourselves.
Hey, sister, this is beautiful. And I've watched you do this in Antonio with the Movement Guild, which is actually happening in 45 minutes, has gifted me with some versions of these spaces. And sister, earlier this week on Monday, led a new moon ceremony with a beautiful song and with a prompt, which was to say, you know, turn your videos off, you can keep them on, but we can just kind of move. We've been now in a quite heavy space for 75 minutes, and you know, some people may have to go soon. What I'll do is just play one song, ask you to turn your videos off, take some deep breaths, get a glass of water. If you are inclined toward any form of movement, feel free to do so. And this will be kind of us signing off generally for this call. So we'll be here after, but I'll play and we'll be back in a few.
Legendary beats. My blessing come now. Favor fall down on me. Goodness and mercy follow me every day. Everything when I touch for this life, anything when I want. She not much one, no, she not pushy, oh. Now me get am. If they're the dirty, don't mind them. If bottom belly come, me you buy them. My time don't come, me oh. Ayo abba, let me oh. Ire oh, ayo me de oh. Every day oh, showers of blessing rain on me. She not money where you want oh. I be your pheromone oh. Time me don't come oh. Ayo abba, let me oh. Happiness no give prosperity something I'm blessing calling oh. Ayo abba, let me I should you up oh. Wherever we go, victory when no the finish. I need 10 video. Look, you know go round down. No more tension, no wala. Tori all I want lay. Oh, what's it there? House has it all out. Video. Ayo atala feel. Alone I want be a tenuga. If you believe, oh, shabi oh, aniko shabi oh. Amire oh, ayo me de oh. Every day oh, showers of blessing rain on me. She not money where you want oh. I be your pheromone oh. Time me don't come oh. Ayo abba, let me oh. Happiness no give prosperity something I'm blessing calling oh. Ayo abba, let me oh. Atewo ko mi aro, atewo ko mi aro. Olóríire ó yá kó máa rọ̀. Èmi rè o, ó yá dance the dance of olówó. As you go, money go follow. Before you ask, God go answer. Ayo, 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 ayo sí mi délé o. Ọlá bá mi délé. Ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. Ṣé na money wey you want oh? I be your pheromone oh. Time me don't come, joy don't come oh. Abba, let me oh. Happiness knocking, prosperity something I'm blessing calling oh. Ayo Abba, let me oh. Ore, Abba, let me oh. Make this love this with me for body Abba, let me oh. Ireti wa let me oh. Ireti ba let me oh. Ayo, Abba, let me oh.
All right. I hope everyone enjoyed some movement, some water, some stretching, some exhilaration. Sister or Andy, do you have any last words before we go for today?
I give thanks and praise. I give thanks and praise, and I continue to salute everyone on the courage and their passion, the love, and the willingness to talk about things that most people in this world can't even begin to create a thought pattern for. So I give thanks and praise.
Thank you, sister. It's I mean, a blessing beyond words to be with you. Andy, please go ahead.
I will just echo something very beautiful that Sister said earlier. You know, in the Tao Te Ching, it says to give birth, to nourish, and not to own. To give birth, to nourish, and not to own. It seems like the masculine kind of courage goes out to do something in the world. The matrilineal courage gives birth and nourishes and never owns. It just creates and gives. Every woman is born with all of the eggs she will ever produce already in her ovaries. And every one of us carries the mitochondrial DNA of our mothers. We inherit more from our mothers than our fathers, because mitochondrial DNA can only fit in ova, not in spermatozoa. And so it is the birthright for each of us to give birth, to nourish, not to own. That courage which lets go and which echoes what Sister said about being and not doing is something you have given us, Sister. Thank you so much. We love you, truly. Thank you.
We leave with another song, because how else would it be? Sister, thank you. Everyone who's here, you all know how much it means to us. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you soon.